I think it's becoming clear that a large number of jobs, I mentioned this before, a large number of jobs is going to disappear. Robots and artificial intelligence are going to be better at doing them, or faster or cheaper. And then there are a few areas where humans have an advantage over the technology. Some are at the top of the labor market, where things like creativity will become, there will be more of a premium on things like creativity than there is now. So people who are able to use technology or wield technology to do powerful things, those people are going to be in high demand, and they're going to be very well paid. And then the other space, unfortunately, where humans have an advantage is at the bottom end of the labor market, where it's simply where you have lots of personal interactions, which are hard to do with computers and robots. But it's a low-skilled job, so people will not be paid very much. And those are like the lower-end healthcare jobs, hospitality, restaurants, servers, waiters, those kind of things. So universities, I would say, are more positioned to target the top. But that means we should be looking at training people who can look beyond their discipline, who are not just focused on one particular area where they try to become experts, because expertise is becoming more dangerous. The moment you go narrow and narrow and narrow and you develop expertise, I think the chances are higher that you will be replaced by software. What's hard to replace is ingenuity and taking ideas from totally different places. And again, the universities are set up in schools or departments with disciplines. And we talk a lot about interdisciplinary work, but we don't do it very well. And so the Media Lab where I work has an interesting approach. We say that we are anti-disciplinary, because interdisciplinary still assumes that you have a physicist and an economist, and they speak their own language, and then once in a while they get together and they say, we're going to do something together, like epidemiology, right? Interesting for both fields. But then you're still in those disciplines, and then there's a little bit of space in between them. But what about all this other space outside of the disciplines, right? Like where maybe the most interesting problems lie. Is climate change, for example, should only one discipline be focused on climate change? No, of course not. You need all of them. You need people who think about political systems, because how are you going to govern a global movement? You need economists who think about the economics of climate change. Obviously, you need scientists who understand the models and how the world is changing. But so I think the one thing is anti-disciplinary or interdisciplinary, or more meshing things up and throwing them around, preparing people to think like that, where maybe they're strong in 2 or 3 areas. And the other one is really focusing on things that computers are not good at, which is come up with new ideas, be creative. And ironically, those are kinds of things that often require you to work less. And so we know that creativity and new ideas often come when we go on holiday. And we spend 2 weeks doing nothing. And all of a sudden at the end, we have this idea. We have no idea where it came from. But they only come when you can kind of get distance. And so we're not really, the universities are not set up right now to support people to become creators and thinkers and have new ideas. I mean, to some degree, we say we are, but really we tell them exactly what they need to do, and then it's a carrot and a stick. We help them a little bit, and we push them a little bit. And then at the end, they go. But so I think as the world values those kinds of skills more in the future, the universities should think about how they could support those. The relationship between the institution, university, and the institutions around it and society around it will also need to change. The Media Lab, again, is an interesting case study, because we are part of MIT, but we have our own academic program called Media Arts and Sciences, which you can only study at the Media Lab. So we have a lot of freedom in how we structure it. And then secondly, we are funded almost exclusively through corporate memberships. So large companies pay an annual fee. There's a big pot of money, and then that money gets divided internally. But it's not directed research. So it's not that a company comes and says, I need a better laser, or I need a faster car, or I need a more durable cotton or something. It's companies that say, we believe that you are going to come up with interesting new ideas, and we're going to give you some money to support that. And in exchange, we've figured out a way to share our intellectual property with them, where each company gets a royalty-free, non-exclusive license to everything we come up with. And the companies then have to evaluate, is that worth the investment? What are they getting out of it? But I think that's one interesting model, that you can structure a research institute in a way where we're largely funded by industry, but we're not controlled by industry. And then the benefit is, often the transfer of scientific research into the market is complicated. But if the companies are funding you as an institution and they get to know you, they come twice a year, they build personal relationships with the researchers, they're much more likely to pick up things that are coming out of the Media Lab and then taking them into their world. And actually, I have a great story there, which I recently learned. The most successful intellectual property of the Media Lab was developed, or most used, I don't know if most successful, but most used, was developed in a lab that studies new types of musical performances. And they were studying how you could control musical instruments through the movement of the body in space, right? So if I move my hands like this or move my head, I could control the sound, which you would think there's no commercial application for this, right? It's crazy arts. So there's a car company that was a member of the Media Lab, and they saw this project, and they said, this addresses a problem that we have in our cars, which is we want to control the speed of the airbag based on where the head of the driver is. If they're leaning forward, the airbag has to be a little bit slower, because otherwise it's too close. And if they're leaning backwards, then the airbag can come out with full force because there's enough time for the person to come forward. So they created a patent around this, they licensed it. It's the most used patent out of the Media Lab. But it would have never happened if a car company had come to a research institute and said, this is what we need, and then we would have made it. They didn't even know that they needed this. But when they saw this other thing, so I think this relationship between companies and research institutions and higher education could be revisited. And then your second point was, well, what about other institutions? That's an area that I am personally very interested in, because I think I'm here for the conference tomorrow, which is pushing boundaries of higher education. And one of the boundaries, of course, is the walls of the institution, right? Like you're either inside or you're outside. And then the first step is we throw the books over the walls. It's distant education. Before we would mail them to the students. Now we send them emails or we send them videos. But what if we opened the walls more and we let people set up their own little shops? And so sometimes I think about this as distributed education versus distance education. Distance education first, distributed education second. And then you can start making alliances with all these interesting institutions. So in my work, for example, I work with public libraries a lot, because public libraries are incredible places for learning, but they draw a very different audience than typical education institutions. And so in the US, where I work, if you want to reach adults with low basic skills who really need access to education, the libraries are an amazing entry point because they are safe, they're trusted. Librarians are essentially trained to be knowledge workers, and they offer a range of services that is targeted at these adults. So distributing higher education into other spaces, I think, with technology now is another area that's very